Immanuel Kant is one of the most influential and important philosopher ever existed, with Hegel for what concern the 19th century and even a small part of the 18th century, at least after the French Revolution. Immanuel Kant is one of the most influential because it changed completely the way we approach philosophy. Is the first to truly create a system that move for the first time the idea of philosophy as a subject that studies not the object but the subject that knows. So I use subject in two different ways. Now we are talking about subject initially as an academic way, the university subject, like philosophy, history, literature. And the second way is the subject in the sense of the subject that studies, that approach something. Like in this case is a person, humanity, mankind, men and women that study philosophy, study the idea of God, study nature, no? Before the question was what was nature? What is God? What is history? If history exists, no? And with Kant, we came to the final realization that the problem is not just what is God, but what we can know about God, which are the limits of our reason, and in a more like cold way of our brain, no? Is our brain capable of knowing, for example, infinite information? No, it's not. Is our brain able to understand and think something outside time and space? No, it's not. We can study it, we can create an hypothesis, but as a brain, we don't have the faculty of understanding. Is our brain able to do very complex mathematical equations? No, it's not. Without a pen or a computer or a notebook, is almost impossible. These are limits. And these limits are very important because it's pointless to think about what is nature, what is history, what is God, if we don't have the humble starting point to try to understand what we can know, which are our limits. Because knowing God is pointless if we have to admit to ourselves that we cannot know God apart from maybe a revelation through a holy book. If we meet God, and that is amazing, literary genius in Italian poetry is Dante Alighieri, that said in the last, he created this amazing poem of 100 divided in 100 parts, and in the last one, Dante, through this travel through the hell till the paradise, till the heaven, to meet God, no? And in all this travel, he meets a lot of interesting historical and mythical figures such as Ulysses or kings of the history. And at the end, he meets God. And what he says, he cannot look at God because the light is too intense and too strong. That's a good understanding of the fact that Dante himself, without even realizing, was predicting Immanuel Kant theory, clearly stating that man cannot look with their eyes at God. So there is a part of God that cannot be known. So before we spend time and pages writing about God, maybe we should also consider what we can know about him. And this can be applied to any single philosophical thing. So this is a revolution, but as you can all imagine, is something that transforms move the problem, no? Move the problem for the first time. And neurosciences, studying the brain, understanding the dreams, Freud, all these like new psychology, even sociology, all these new disciplines start to take new meaning, a new sense to be created. And new disciplines are born exactly because there is the need now to understand how the brain works, for example, and also arriving to save lives. No, um, so Kant is fundamental not just for this reason, obviously, moving finally the attention to instead the object of that we study to the subject is studying the object is also immense because he has a synthesis role regarding the previous philosophies, especially empiricism and rationalism. Empiricism is most based on to make it like very simple laboratory, no? Galileo's like what's an experiment, how we can verify information or facts that we know with our experience. And rationalism is more based on something that you could do on a notebook without interacting with the real world, like mathematics, for example, formulas and calculus, and this can be applied also to how we know God. For example, a very difference than empiricists will try to find the reason of why God exists in the perfection of nature, observing the universe, in human relationships, in the book of Revelation, the Holy Bible. No, a rationalist will try to prove the existence of God purely by the usage of maybe mind, of rationality. So, for example, in like with the mental experiment of Descartes that started with the foundation of his system by the only certainty that we have, that we think, and because we think it starts to be the system that arrived to demonstrate the existence of God. That's amazing, but that's purely made in our head, no, without experience. So this is the difference between rationality and empiricists to make it easy. Obviously, there is an impressive like role of unification, unifies the Enlightenment and Romanticism. No, Enlightenment was the last. It was ending in that moment. It was at its peak with the French Revolution, Voltaire, Diderot, D'Alembert, all these French philosophers and people. Writers and with the first encyclopedia that was born, that was used not just to convey information but also to convey revolutionary information masked with them into the voices now, so people could read the word maybe woman and actually there were some hints of feminism now that you could find, etc., etc. And the Romanticism is the movement that came after Kant, but it actually initiated. It started with some of his like the two of his most masterpieces. So he wrote three masterpieces that we will focus on. One is the end of the Enlightenment. The other two represent the beginning of the Romanticism. No, and that's incredible because with with this there is a new role for irrationality, emotions, history, the medieval age, all the history as I don't know, power and spirit. With Hegel is the personification of that. So Romanticism have a completely opposite approach. So it's incredible that this man represented the end of one movement, the beginning of the other one. No, and obviously Kant is also one of the most difficult because it's very long in his system of thoughts. So for example, he demonstrates whatever God, justice, the scientific mind, how it works, how we share information, how we know stuff, which are the limit of the reason. So this question they try to answer in a very long system. So the length and the length of his system make it a bit difficult. Sometimes he uses terms in dual manner inside his own theory. So these terms can change the meaning. So for people who studied them, these have been obviously very difficult to interpret. Maybe even Kant didn't realize that probably was changing the way he used these kind of terms. One is, for example, his noumenon, but we will go back to that. And also use new terms that were used before in philosophy, like transcendent, critical, aesthetic, and deductive, that are changed completely in their meaning. So use them maybe going back to the Greek root, and that makes it slightly different, especially when the teachers start to use them without clarifying that these terms have a completely different sense, no? Another thing that makes him difficult is the diversity of interest, because obviously he's also considered the father of Europe, the father of pacifism, so politics. He created a model for a nebula in astrophysics, that is the theory of Kant Laplace, and that's even valid now. Is a sort of hypothesis of how stars were created from dust, previous dust. So his interest goes into astrophysics. He was fascinated by Newton, and obviously another reason is that the three masterpieces, the Critique of the Judgment, and the other two critiques, because so are called, these three masterpieces, are talk about different arguments. So there are several reasons why Kant is not easy to approach. The previous philosophy goes back to Plato, Aristotle, when you consider Kant, but we can definitely mention Machiavelli, Moro, Campanella, because they were interested in politics such as him, so they tried to find political solution. Or we can also mention Copernicus, Kepler, Bacon, Galileo, Newton, the Enlightenment, because this is scientific method. For them is fundamental, the scientific method is a fundamental, the role of empiricism and rationalism in science, etc., etc. And also humanism, and that's the first step toward Kantism, because humanists put the man at the center, and they start to forget God. And this path start with humanism in the 16th century, in the even 15, even 14, we can go back to a certain extent, and humanism start to move from God, from religion, to an interest in man, in politics, in man's behavior, in science. And as we can imagine, the evolution of this will reach the peak in Kant, because Kant is the first one who finally understand that the problem is what we can know, and not just answering the question about stuff that we want to know. In empiricism and rationalism is summarize Aristotle, Hume, that is very important, we'll talk about it again, and Locke, and Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz are more rationalist, and they will be definitely considered and used. We will skip some of them because we cannot go through all of them, but definitely they are considered like fundamental to his learning phase, at least the first phase. The Enlightenment is represented by the critique of pure reason, and their romanticism is represented by the critique of practical reason and the critique of judgment. These are the three masterpieces. He wrote way more stuff, but definitely we can consider him like these three, the most important, that one that we will focus on. Neurosciences, psychology, sociology, we already said that. Kant is pivotal. Kant is fundamental. From the humanists, the evolution, and finally the understanding to set the boundaries to what we can and we cannot know, opens to a series of disciplines that are focused on that. But Kant is so monumental, that is famous for so many things, that the lessons could go for at least 50-60 hours of lesson, and still it won't be enough to explain his genius. But some of the questions we try to answer is what is the enlightenment, no? And is um, the famous sentence that is states that it is the exit of man from the state of minority to which man himself has condemned himself for having renounced the use of his reason autonomously. And this is extraordinary. This is the first time he truly set, he put the spot on the idea of autonomous reason and critical thinking that is extremely important as citizens, against propaganda, against incoherencies, against how we apply human rights, for example, through nations. Is The logic of war, for example, changes between Putin, Netanyahu, and America and Iran, no? Whoever took the decision for certain people is interpreted in a different way, and that should be avoided, because for Kant this is things that we are willing other people to influence ourselves with their propaganda, instead to have an autonomous critical thinking that decides that the principles are exactly the same and are applied to everybody the same, no? The other question, obviously, what can I know? So which are the limits of the reason? He praised, obviously, modern science like Bacon, Copernicus, we said earlier, and Copernicus changed the history of humanity because he put the sun at the center, no? Of the solar system instead of the earth, and that was a revolution because it changed completely the arrogant position of the man, but also he gave to certain view a more like relative way, so absolute became less important and relative approaches became more important. So religion and God are less important, because imagine if we have many planets with life, the Jesus, the Muhammad, Moses will be all less relevant, no? Because we have other planets with life. So that's an impressive starting point of the revolution of Copernicus, not based purely on knowledge and studies, not anything else, while the other position was based on prejudices and irrational behavior, no? And religious and based on faith and not on reason. And the other question is, what should I do? Because from the critic of the pure reason, it goes to the other critic, the critic of the practical reason, that talks about morality, what is ethic, what is the moral law, how we should behave as human being, how human rights, what's the foundation of human rights. And that's impressive. Now this man started this conversation. And the final one, the critic of the judgment, is what can I hope for? Aesthetic, also the hope, aesthetic, nature as something that is connected to the idea of beauty, how we consider something beautiful or not. The analysis of aesthetic judgment, if beauty can be universal or subjective, etc., etc. It's extremely interesting, no? And he spent a lot of time debating on that.